Ian Trottier here for discussions of truth. And folks, got an incredible guest here today for you. Look, more and more Americans are realizing that the mainstream media, right, is completely it's propagandized, right? So it's meant to shape viewers and listeners to take either a left approach or a right approach. That's in some ways called a thesis versus antithesis, right? So Hegelian dialectic. And today's guest, and I just, by the way, I just returned from DC, where I'll get into that in a little bit. But today's guest is Ricky Schroder, the childhood actor. He's a Golden Globe winner. He at the age of 9 with John Voight, he filmed The Champ, which was a remake. So we'll bring Ricky on in a few minutes. But in DC, something very important, and I just got off the phone with an author that has published, is a New York Times bestseller. He also uh, he's also published with Skyhorse. He's done recent work with RFK Jr., with Judy Mikovits, Alex Jones, Zach Voorhees, the Google whistleblower. Um, I have expressed and shared this story with Kent and also with Skyhorse Publishing. There's a possibility that they take it on. I'm definitely taking the story on. This is a former FBI agent that uncovered and has uncovered John Brennan, the knowledge that John Brennan had of various what turned out to be terrorist suspects and terrorists that entered the country, i.e., the Boston bombing. John Donovan is a former FBI agent and private analyst that exposed Brennan's knowledge of this. On my website, Ian Trottier, that's INTROTTIER.com, I get into this and I make this available per John's permission. I make his binder, PDF binder, available for you to view. I've also sent it to a number of people, including James O'Keefe, um, to look at the work that Donovan has compiled. Um, it's all public, unclassified information. He's simply compiled it. So take a moment and look at that. I was at CPAC. I met with John there at CPAC, where he gave that information to me. By the way, Donald Trump spoke at CPAC and addressed the crowd there at the Gaylord Convention Center. So that is incredibly important to look at because we have, therefore, John Brennan's knowledge of these suspects entering into the United States to, of course, conduct with malintent these acts of terror in the United States. The claim is incredibly substantial, but Brennan makes, or excuse me, Donovan makes an incredibly strong claim with the research that he's done. And of point is something called X key score, which is what Snowden exposed. Right, this is what Edward Snowden exposed. There's elements of the publication in the binder that if Snowden is available to get connected to, will further help Donovan show Brennan's knowledge of the cover up. If this is all entirely true, folks, if Brennan indeed had knowledge of this NSA program as the head of the CIA, then we're unraveling what is the deep state. And I will mention this to you. I will mention that I frequently go to the Italian nobility as having knowledge and certainly controlling elements of the deep state. This is critical knowledge because during the Obama presidency, a member of the Aldo Brandini family met at the White House with Jay Carney. This is information that I have gleaned per the research that Donovan has provided in that binder, available again at iantrottier.com. That's INTROTTIER.com. standing by, folks, for Mr. Ricky Schroder to join us, and we're going to talk to him really about what he understands as the various enemies facing the country today, and we'll get his view of what's happening in the country, and of course we're going to talk a little bit about what is going on in Hollywood, right? What has he been exposed to, right? In Hollywood, being a childhood actor and certainly acting throughout his career. What has he been exposed to? So we're simply waiting for Ricky to join the chat room here, and I'll bring him on once I see him having joined. So again, going back to uh, going back to the going back to the Donovan binder, the element of the deep state, and I'm going to simply mention Leonardo satellite. Um, the Leonardo satellite system uh, is critical in understanding. Here we go. Okay, so we've got Ricky here. Let's go ahead and open this up. Let's see. I might have to bring in Jim. Hey, Jim. Oh, here you go. Here we go. Okay. Admit. I think I got it here. Okay. Here. See, Ricky, are you there? Unmute there. Oh, here he is, Ricky.
Yeah, just unmute him.
Okay. Just gonna unmute this here, Ricky.
To the top up there. Yeah, ask to unmute. There you
Hi.
go.
Ah,
There you go. Good.
welcome.
Hi, Ricky.
Hello.
Welcome to Discussions of Truth, Ricky. I am Ian Trottier, and I appreciate the work that you have done, sir. Good day to you.
Good day to you, Ian. Thanks for having me. What do you want to talk about today?
Well, well, I want to talk about saving the country, but for viewers and listeners, let's get into a little bit of Ricky. What you what has caused you to do some of the work that you do, and certainly you've got the Real American Heroes program that you started, and also the Council on Pornography and Reform. What caused you to start these organizations, Ricky?
Yeah, Ian, thanks for that question. So I was a member of the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences since I've been 8 years old. And, they're responsible for handing out the most prestigious Oscars to the best films. A few years ago, because of the DEI requirements, they changed the guidelines. And to be eligible for the Best Picture category, you actually have to have LGBTQ story themes and characters and personnel work on the films. And so it's an insult because, Gold Star families send their kids to fight and die in America's wars sometimes. And the Academy says that those stories aren't eligible for the Best Picture Oscar because of the DEI requirements. And when I saw that take place, I realized, Hollywood has fallen. And I still want to tell stories. I still want to make documentaries and films, but I wanted to do it out with a new structure. And so I set up a 501c3 Real American Heroes Foundation. And its mission is to tell those stories of the people that wear the uniforms and others in the past, present, and future who embody the values and the principles that made America great and aren't trying to destroy it. And so I envision building a Patriot PBS where we can, as viewers, take our money out of Hollywood and put it into an organization that produces films that honor us and don't tear us down. And it becomes like it'll grow because the endowment will grow as people purchase those projects. We'll have more funds available, and we can give scholarships to other storytellers and filmmakers because the programming is where we've got into this big problem. The programming from, Hollywood and music that has now been 40, 50 years pushed into our society and our culture is having its effect, its propaganda effect on us. And so that's why Real American Heroes was created. So other storytellers, not just me, and we can build something for us outside the Hollywood system to tell our stories.
Yeah, let me ask you a question though, and I like the word that you've used, propaganda, and certainly this is a motive and a directive that's certainly not coming from constitutional values in my view. At what point in time you got started early in Hollywood at the age of 9? He said 8. You won a Golden Globe, I think it was. At what point in time in your career you've basically spent most 90% of your life exposed to and working inside of this propaganda machine, and now you're making almost a 180, right? You're saying, wait a second, this is going in a direction that doesn't uphold my values. And I know, Ricky, that John Voight, I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, but John Voight, my understanding, has some of these conservative constitutional values, pro-America, right? America
Yes.
first values.
Yes.
However, what we see in the propaganda machine here is not necessarily, it's definitely not America first. At what point in time, Ricky, did you see that value system not supporting those of your own?
Well, I was I don't know how else to say it,
That
but
makes sense. Yeah.
I was a counter programming asset. I wasn't an actor. And so I was given my first movie when I was six years old. Howie, go outside. Can you put him out? It was Jaws 2. I was supposed to play Roy Scheider's son, and that fell through during production. And then they gave me my next movie when I was 7 years old, The Champ. And a lot of these sort of memories of it's a long story. How much time do we have?
We got an hour. And I can extend that if you want. Are those your hunting dogs?
Yeah, they're pets, but they're come from hunting lines. Well, goodness, let's step back for a second. So in November of 2020, a man came to my house and he said he had a copy of Hunter Biden's laptop and some voting data for the Smartmatic elector machines that he wanted to share with me. So for 4 hours, we went through Hunter Biden's laptop, and he showed me how 6 million votes had been changed on election night in 3 main attacks from Iran, Syria, and Iran, Russia, and China. And we went through that data, and he left me with some of it. And I couldn't validate what he'd given me, but I did believe it was true. And so I spent a few months thinking about what I was going to do with this information. And that event with that man, he'd come to my house 10 years earlier. I'd met him when I lived in Topanga, California. I went to the local coffee shop, and we had a farm there, and I had 5 miniature Sicilian donkeys that were great pets, but the kids weren't playing with them anymore. And so I wanted to give them to a family. So I asked the local coffee barista if she knew of anybody who might want them. And so she said, I might. And so this man shows up with a horse trailer, and we visited for a while. My son was very impressed with him and myself. And we visited, and it was a nice conversation. And then he came to my house 10 years later with Hunter Biden's laptop. And so
Unannounced?
No, a phone call came first and said that he was coming. And so I'd met him once before. So we spent 4 hours together, and he shared with me what he shared with me. And then I started having some like memories from childhood. And one of them was, not just one of them, but there was a man that I used to put headphones on me. And we would sit in a room, he and I, and I'm not sure exactly what went on in that room, but every Saturday I'd visit with him, or most Saturdays, because I would play tennis. I grew up on the courts. And so as a little kid, I grew up on the courts. And this was somebody I remembered that my dad played tennis with. So I went to my parents and I said, Hey guys, any idea why this man, I remember dad played tennis with him, would put headphones on me and a tape recorder in a room. And they were like, no, we have no idea. And so I asked my sister, I said, Dawn, do you have any idea what this could be? And she said, oh yeah, I know his name. His name was John Tolve, Tolve. And he did it with me a few times. And so I went back to my parents and I said, Mom, Dad, who is John Tolve? And they're like, oh, John. My dad's like, oh, John. He was a tennis friend of mine and he was an NYPD detective for 30 plus years. But I have no idea why he would have put headphones on you and your
Hey,
sister.
Ricky, were you in New York or California when this was happening?
So I grew up in Staten Island, New York. And so I grew up on the tennis courts at St. Joseph's by the Sea. It's a Catholic high school in Staten Island. So every Saturday from 9 to 12, I would go play tennis. But at some point during that 3 hours, I would be taken into a classroom. And this would happen with John Tolve, whatever was happening. But it happened other places. It also happened at homes, not just at the high school. So my parents have no idea. They say, my dad says, not my parents. My dad says he has no idea why this would have happened. And but it made me have more questions. And my mother, the last, I'm estranged from my parents, unfortunately. But the last thing she said to me was that there was other kids in the program, that it wasn't just me. And I remember there was a couple other boys that were just like me. They had blonde hair and blue eyes, and their mom was from Germany. And my dad worked with their father at IBM. And so I'm not sure how many kids were involved in the program, but there was a program, and there was a bunch of parents, all related to IBM or AT&T parents, that had children that they were pushing into, or somebody was pushing into the entertainment field and giving movies to, giving opportunities to. And so I was given the champ when I was 7 years old. And all those memories related to that whatever it was came back after they brought me Hunter Biden's laptop. And then as I look back in my past, and the documentaries I made in Afghanistan, the access I was given to go deep into the process of war, it's not normal, the amount of access I was given to tell the fighting season, let's say, the documentary. And so I believe there was a program, and it was Ronald Reagan's program, because I got to meet him 3 times when I was younger with my father. And from what I can determine is that propaganda came in big time under his reign, his administration. There was something that happened in the law that allowed propaganda for the first time to be to be allowed into America in the way it was. And there was a change in the law, and I'd like to identify it for you. I looked at it one time, and I don't recall it off the top of my head. And I believe that this was a counter-programming effort that Reagan had, because he knew the power of influence of celebrity, and that they planted me there, and then they sort of reignited me, if that makes any sense, re-engaged me.
Yeah. Also interesting, there's 2 things that come to my mind, Ricky, under this administration you're speaking of, Ronald Reagan. And by the way, I think he's the original "Make America Great." I think that was a slogan that Reagan had come up with. I'm not sure if that predates him, but I believe he used that. The first thing is the vaccination legislation that was passed under his administration, where the pharmaceutical companies cannot be attacked. Right? So if your child is vaccine injured, you couldn't go after the pharmaceutical companies. That is a law that passed under the Reagan administration. The other thing that comes to my mind is this, and a lot of stuff that I do, Ricky, is I'd like to dig into the deep state, which means I like to look into the exact foundation of the country, right? And who funded it, how the British East Indies Company made it. So I look at some of all these historical aspects and trying to
The
understand where
Fed.
the country came from. So
Fed.
also what happened under the Reagan administration, Ricky, and it sounds like you've got some things to say, but also what happened under the Reagan administration was at least 100, I think it was 120 years prior to Ronald Reagan, the United States as a government did not have official relations with Rome, being the Vatican. And it was under Ronald Reagan that those relations were officially reorganized and redeveloped. That was under Reagan. It happened under Reagan. Very important, very key, because John F. Kennedy, as we know, was assassinated. My interpretation is not he was not assassinated because of some crazy Marine. That was a well-organized hit on a man that wanted to liberate the economy from the Federal Reserve System that had been passed in 1913, and he wanted to reinstitute the U.S. Treasury. So a lot of this has to do with money, and you're bringing propaganda, and that means brainwashing basically the masses to think in one way or another. Anyway, some of your thoughts.
Yes. You know, my grandfather Hans Schroder grew up in Egypt in the embassy, in the German embassy. His father was a diplomat in Cairo, Egypt, and he came to America, Hans. And I guess, you know, right before World War II, a lot of people were concerned about the Germans, and some feds showed up to his house, and there was a radio involved that they took, and this is according to my father. And my father says that he was just listening to German opera, and it freaked the neighbors out in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. And Rise of the Valkyries, I think it was the song. And so anyway, they got my family became known to the feds back then. And so an interesting fact is that everybody in my family has had some visit from a federal agency other than me, starting with my grandfather Hans, all the way through my sister Dawn. They've all had visits, official visits, from some federal security apparatus agency. I never have. So I don't know where that fits in with all this, but it's just interesting family history. I don't know how to transition out of that because I have more questions than answers about it.
The fellow that you'd met, and it sounds like you met him playing tennis as a kid, and then he reinserted himself in your life. So it's almost as if your entire life was being tracked, but he reinserted himself into your life, if I've got this right, and he brought in the Hunter laptop.
No.
Yeah, go ahead.
So John Talvey was the man that I guess you'd call him my programmer. I don't know what he was doing with headphones on me other than some sort of education.
MK Ultra?
I don't know. I don't know exactly. But John Talvey passed away in 2019. The man that came to my house and brought me the Hunter Biden stuff, he said that he worked as a contractor for 3-letter agencies. He's also the man that took my donkeys 10 years earlier from my farm. So 10 years prior to giving me the Hunter stuff, he came to my farm and took those donkeys. John Talvey was my father's tennis player, a partner in New York, and it was a NYPD cop for 30 plus years. And I remember I lost contact with John Talvey once we had moved, but I never lost contact with tennis coaches until I was about 19 years old. I had tennis coaches on East and West Coast that I never asked for, but it was always new people coming through my life as coaches to work me out. And so I'm assuming there was whatever they were trying to instill in me, it was reinforced through tennis. Because like I said, I had a busy career and I had no need for tennis coaches, but they were there.
And do you remember them shaping your thoughts in one way or the other regarding tennis or Hollywood? Obviously, you excelled as an actor more so than tennis, or at least you decided to put energy that way.
I'm an asset. I'm not an actor. It's an asset.
Right. Right.
That's
Explain that, Ricky. Explain that. What does that mean?
well, like my room as a child was decorated with Revolutionary War motif. So my bedspread, my pillow, all the art on my walls was all from the founding fathers. And so I slept every night in a comforter with pictures on the wall of our founding fathers. If you go to St. Joseph's by the Sea High School rec room today, you'll see some of the same artwork on their walls that was in my bedroom as a child. And so I believe it was I'm assuming, but I believe it had to do with 1776, and it had to do with the founding fathers, and it had to do with the Lord, and it had to do with these kinds of issues and concerns and thoughts. It's my best guess.
And do you feel that you have been used as a productive asset? And whose asset are you? Are you still an asset?
I don't know how they feel about me now, because I'm talking about things that maybe they don't want talked about. So I'm not sure. They haven't come after me, I know, and they have ways to do that if should they want to, and they haven't. And so I don't know if I'm being protected or what, but I'm an asset of the Lord is really what I'm an asset of, because I do believe that Jesus is the only way out of this mess, and at the point we're at, and so whatever their intentions were for me, I'm not 100% sure, but I know what my intentions are now.
Ricky, who's the they? Who do you think the they are?
The people that program the news, the people that create the news cycle, the people that control our emotional and our emotional states as a nation. These are the people, there's good and bad in the CIA. There's good and bad in every organization. And so I think that's the CIA.
The CIA. And speaking of John F. Kennedy, right? I just had this conversation with a guy named Alan Ehrlich, and he runs a construction company he lives at 502 Park Avenue. I just did a podcast with him yesterday, and a friend of mine. And I asked him, I says, Alan, he's known Donald Trump since the 80s, I think, and maybe even the 70s. And I asked him, I says, what is the deep state in your view, Alan? What is it? And the response he gave to me, Ricky, was, well, those are simply people that object to Donald Trump, and it was really even that Donald Trump categorizes these people as being opposed to him, so he puts them into a category. Of course, he calls the fake news, the mainstream media, fake news. A lot of that runs through the Council on Foreign Relations, which is tied into, of course, the City of London. I don't know if you looked at that at all, but the City of London finances the monarchy, not the other way around. The monarchy is simply a puppet for the bankers that reside in the City of London. Similar to how the Federal Reserve, I believe, controls the Constitution of the people, and the government that's supposed to represent that Constitution. And certainly the government does not represent the Constitution, not so much. So the deep state, therefore, becomes a very complex answer. And what is a deep state? And so I disagreed with Alan. But one of the things I inserted, Ricky, was, wait a second. So you take a Republican versus Democrat, and it doesn't really matter what side of the political field people may align themselves with, because they're both driving the national deficit out of control. They're both, a $34 trillion deficit. It doesn't really matter if it's Republican or Democrat. And I went back to John F. Kennedy. So we're talking about the CIA here, and how trustworthy, of course, is the CIA? Well, there's a number of whistleblowers that come out and said the CIA, which is formerly the OSS, which has ties to London again. All right, and so it's the British were not our first enemy. The French were, excuse me, the British were not our first ally. The French were our first ally. General Lafayette was our first ally. So it becomes very complex. But just to piggyback off of this, you mentioned the CIA, and so how much of the deep state is composed of elements of the CIA or the entire organization as it is altogether? Because John F. Kennedy, a Democrat, wanted to splinter it into 1,000 pieces. sources. Anyways, go ahead.
Interesting fact about General Lafayette. He gave George Washington a pack of Grand Blue Gascon French hounds. And I have a Grand Blue Gascon French hound. Her name is Darla. And anyways, General Lafayette. Well, yeah. So where do we do with this information? You know, where do we take it? How do you process it? How do you, I mean, I'm trying to do something with what I know and what I believe to be true. And so the best thing is just put some boots to the ground and do some hard work and fight them on the porn front. You know, I like the porn fight. There's a lot of perversion, I think, in that world of globalist CIA. There's a lot of, and so I like the porn fight. Even if we don't win it, I like the porn fight. You know, what they did was intentional with porn to corrupt us. You know, when pornography on the internet first came out, but think about it, since the invention of the camera is when they could distribute it. So 150 years, they've been pushing it into society, right? It's escalated incredibly fast with the internet. But when I was a child, pornography, I remember when it first went into 7-Elevens. It was behind the register and it was behind plastic and you couldn't see it. Like a year or two later, they moved it to the aisles. And now like all the young boys could look at the magazines. Then shortly thereafter came the internet, and they used the perversion of the freedom of speech, which it says in our Constitution. They interpreted that to mean freedom of expression. And so, you know, when the forefathers wrote freedom of speech and freedom of the press, there were no cameras, there was no electricity. And they redefined freedom of speech to mean freedom of expression, which includes photographs. And they justified pushing that porn into our homes and into our phones. When it first came out, it was in the .xxx URL. The only way you could find adult content was .xxx URL. And various people were insulted by that, including religious leaders of the day. And so they shut down .xxx, and all that filth moved into the .com world. And it was now impossible for parents to like block it because it was whack-a-mole. There was too many porn sites. Before, when it was in .xxx, you could just put a block on your home to anything from .xxx, and you didn't have to worry about it. And so that's one of our major goals, is to get all adult content pushed back into the .xxx URL. And the second major goal is we want to off switch for America. Americans love choice. They love the choice. So why don't Americans have the choice to tell Verizon or AT&T or Comcast or whoever provides your internet, we want all adult content turned off to this account and these sub accounts. And then the family can be protected. You don't have to worry about your teenage boys snooping around on porn because it's off at the cellular provider level. And so those are the two main asks that our council is going to be putting forth. We have others. But if you wanted to learn more about us, you know, you can go to councilonpornreform.org. And it's a good fight to have, because I want to see the people that fight against us, the people that say this is freedom of speech. Yeah. And it exposes your enemies. It reveals them. And so even if you don't win these fights, sometimes they're worth having. And so we're having, you know, we've taken on this fight at this time.
That's great. Do you see anybody revealing themselves right now? And I want you to talk a little bit more about. You refer to yourself as an asset. That's very insightful. What do you see inside the Hollywood machine? Are there people out there that you would trust right now, Ricky? Are there people that are revealing themselves as being part of this this cabal?
Well, I believe there's other assets. And they get designed different ways. You know, the Lord can just convict somebody and change them to his asset as well. What I'm talking about was a different kind of program, but I do believe there's assets and I believe we're outgunned and outmanned big time. And I don't know if that program still exists or or what they're doing. I'm sure it does. Why would they stop it? I do see some people standing up and fighting, but like my friend Brian says, they all have golden shackles. A lot of people in Hollywood, they want their money. They don't want to rock the boat. They just want to do is get along with everybody so they can just slide under. But we're at a point in society where, those are cowards to me. They either take a stand and they demand that things change at the academy, like Tom Hanks and Wilson and Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg, and their movie Saving Private Ryan wouldn't be eligible for the Best Picture category because of the DEI requirements, and I haven't heard a peep out of them to stand up and speak about it. Hollywood's just full of, I don't know, they're different than us. They're not the same. The way they see things and their goals, a lot of them, they're just different than us.
It might be a little more self-serving, a little more shallow, and like you say, simply in it to survive economically and not so much make a difference culturally. Um, uh, Talk a little bit, Ricky, about the border. What are your thoughts on the border? And again, here I am talking to this guy at 502 Park Avenue, and I asked him how he feels about illegal immigration and open border, and he says he has no problem with illegal immigrants coming to the country, but yeah, these people, what are we at? Is it 13 million so far in just a few years? The country is being the culture, language borders and culture is what identifies a country, according to Michael Savage, who I used to listen to quite a bit. But I agree with that, and that's being absolutely slaughtered by this globalist machine. It seems that their desire is to destroy the identity of America, which is what is made American. So you infiltrate and invade, you erode and destroy. Let me mention this to you, Ricky. So I was in Arizona recently, and I've gone down, went down to the border. I spent 3 days down on it, and I was introduced to a guy named Michael Yon. And I get on the phone with Michael Yon, Ricky, and I spend 2 hours on the phone with him. He's down in Panama. He's at a former U.S. Army base called Fort Clayton, and he tells me that the fort has been turned into a UN agency called the International Organization for Migration. This was part of the Carter-Torrijos Treaty back in '79 that said at the end of the century the canal would return back to the Panamanian control. So Michael, what are you finding down there? And of course, you got the Darien Gap, which is where the roads are. A road to connect north and south is not. It's not able to engineer. They can't engineer a road on this Darien Gap. And keeping in mind for listeners and viewers, the country of Panama broke away and declared independence from Colombia. So there's a lot of that interchange still in existence today. But here we have the Teddy Roosevelt starting the Panama Canal and then being finished. I think it was either under Harding, maybe under Wilson. But it took centuries of the Scottish, I believe, perhaps the French, certainly the Spanish were in there trying to canal this isthmus. It was a large fight. And then for the U.S. to just hold on to it for a few decades and then turn it back over, it sounds like it's part of then this debt system, right? So who was Carter in debt to? My point here is this, Ricky: the International Organization for Migration, according to Michael Yon, is orchestrating this invasion northward. What are your thoughts? So it's a UN, right? It's a globalist agenda, a UN agenda. It's not an American first agenda. But what are your thoughts on the border condition? And
Yeah, so there's a huge movie out right now called Migration, and it's a children's movie, and it's programming the children to believe that migration is good, because the storyline in the Disney film is that the waterfowl migrates and gets to safety out of the storms, and then so migration is the word they're all using, right? Instead of illegal aliens or illegal immigrant, they're using migrants. So you can see the CIA at work there, programming the next generation of children to believe that migration is a good, safe thing because the animated movie says it. You could look at Survivor, the TV show that changed the landscape of reality television and the culture. This is a show where people lie, cheat, and steal, and whoever does it best wins. This is a show where people compete for idols. I don't know if you've ever looked at the Bible, but the Bible warns us against idols a lot. And so here's the biggest show on TV for 25 years. And the goal is to get the immunity idol, right? You look at American Idol, the TV show, the singing. Again, they've got us chasing idols. You look at and who's behind that? It's CIA. You look at the furries and the rise of the furry people that pretend like they're animals and trans species and all the people that are in that world. It's connected to bestiality. It came from Disney. You look at Minnie Mouse and Mickey Mouse and Goofy and Donald Duck, the first furries. So they have a deep-seated plan to manipulate, control the thoughts, and control our actions, therefore. And the borders, it's tragic what's happening. You know, citizens of our nation are being killed by violent criminals that are coming from other countries. Yeah. This is treasonous. It's treasonous, their behavior. It's treasonous what they've done. And so many of our fellow citizens are, I guess, low education or low IQ level and just ignorant to the realities of what's happening in our country. And so we have to help them along, and we got to. We also have to stand for the law and the truth, and not be afraid or worried about being called names by them, because we want secure borders and we want law and order. You know, when you decide to speak up, you know, you have to have the courage to just whatever comes with it. And I knew when I bailed Kyle Rittenhouse out of jail that I was going to get a lot of hate. And so I'm glad that I did that for Kyle. And, you know, I did get a lot of hate. And, you know, he deserved his day in court, and he deserved to be treated properly in the press and not convicted. And so, but once that action happened, there was no going back for me. Not that I ever wanted to, but that changed my life, bailing that kid out of jail.
Well, thanks for doing that. I didn't know you were involved in that. And look, I'm gonna send you. I was recently at CPAC in DC, and I met with a guy named John Donovan, a senior who actually is from New York, and his father was FBI agent based in New York. But he gave me a binder, Ricky. He gave me a binder that exposes John Brennan's knowledge of various terrorists entering the country, i.e., the Boston Marathon bomber. Because John had access to, as a private analyst, to databases, CIA databases. What the CIA was using was an NSA program called X-Keyscore. I'd be happy to send this to you because he's trying to get this information out. It ties in, of course, to what Edward Snowden exposed and the corruption. But essentially, what Donovan's work shows is that John Brennan had knowledge of these terrorists entering the country and a knowledge of what they were going to do, and he didn't expose it. Of course, he kept it under lid because he was cashed out on the backside to the tune of about $4 million of this software program. So I'm happy to send that to you if you'd like to take a look at that. But again, here it's CIA. Early on my program, I've had John Carriaco. I started the program in Miami in 2016. John Carriaco. I had Ray McGovern. And then recently, I had a guy named Pedro Ortega join the show. So a lot of this stuff, and I'm glad you're talking about the CIA, a lot of this stuff roots back to the CIA. What are your thoughts, Ricky, on the voter system? One of the reasons I mentioned this is this, and I want you to kind of run with this. One of the reasons I mentioned this is this, Ricky. There's a woman that I befriended a couple years ago that basically blew the whistle. She's not a whistleblower, but she blew the whistle on a program called Leonardo, the Leonardo satellite. And the Leonardo satellite evidently is manipulating voter through a network with Germany Germany was manipulating the voting system at the 2022 election. I firmly believe that the information she has is accurate. During the Obama administration, again, this is when Donovan's doing his work with Brennan. During the Obama administration, there's public record that a Lorenzo Aldo Brandini, which is Italian nobility. And by the way, Maria is being sued by the Italian government. Aldo Brandini met at the White House with Jay Carney. So I believe, Ricky, I believe some of these old family lines in Italy that are easily pawned off as conspiracy theory, right? I'm saying it's not conspiracy theory. This is conspiracy to bring down the United States. And I think they're doing a really good job of it, which hence is one of the reasons I do it. What are your thoughts on that? And again, what are your thoughts on the voting system? And I'm going to mention this again. I know I'm throwing a lot at you, Ricky, but there's something called Vote Scam, The Stealing of America, which two brothers wrote about 15 years ago, the Collier brothers. And they have shown that with IBM, and you mentioned IBM, the IBM and the Council on Foreign Relations, mainstream media, they have colluded to rig presidential elections going back to LBJ. Anyway, it's a lot to digest. What are some of your thoughts?
I don't know where to jump in there. I don't know much about some of what you just asked me. I don't have a clear opinion on those programs. I never did any research into them. I do believe that there's an effort to undermine our democracy, and it's evident. So I don't know. Can you ask me another question? Because I don't know where to go with any of that.
Okay. Well, how do you feel? How do you feel about the election system? Do you have any comments in regards to whether it may be rigged or whether it may be foul play? What are your thoughts on that? And I don't know who you voted for president, but what are your thoughts?
Well, the man that came over my house had a spreadsheet that showed, almost 6 million votes were changed on election night in just the states and the counties they needed to win those electoral votes. And so it had the IP address of the serial number. It had the IP address of the launch of the attack. It had how many votes were changed. It had quite a bit of data on each line item that totaled over 6 million votes, or right around there. And so I can't validate that. I can't validate it. But I know when I saw the press shut down the Hunter Biden laptop 10 days before the election, and shut down the New York Post Twitter account and the Bobolinsky interview, and to hide all that, I saw a coordinated effort to suppress one part of the story. And, from what I know in Nazi Germany, that's what the Nazis did. They took over the radio, and they took over the TV, and they took over the newspapers, and anybody that resisted them, they destroyed or shut down or ruined their lives. And I saw incredible similarities to what I'd heard about the Nazis. My hero, my great uncle Tiny, was a captain in General Patton's Third Army, and I grew up at his feet. Raymond Berthoff was his name. And so he talked to me about the Nazis. He fought them and killed many. And he and because of my grandfather coming from the German embassy in Cairo, Egypt, growing up there, I'd heard about Nazis from my father's side. And so I saw Nazi behavior, and the Nazis, they were wicked, obviously, but they, like, for example, they released diseases into the Jewish community, and they told the German neighbors, these people won't vaccinate. They're dirty Jews. And so when the Jews were dragged away from their houses at night, their German neighbors that were non-Jews, they kind of just turned a blind eye to it, and they let it happen because they already had been convinced that they were diseased and dirty vermin by the propaganda. And so when I saw COVID and I saw them trying to force mask me, I knew if they could get away with force masking me, they could force injection the rest of us. And so I kind of drew a line about the masks, got kicked off an airplane for the masks.
Nice.
Got sent a fine by TSA for the masks.
What was the
Um,
airline? United?
I don't even remember, but they sent me a $13,000 fine, the CSA. They said, this is your penalty if this happens again. And anyways, so I saw the Nazi behavior in the way the media was acting and the way medicine was acting. I mean, the Nazis experimented, they were the first to experiment on human beings in the recent past. Like, they experimented on twins, they experimented on humans. And when I see this gender transitioning and the cutting off of little girls' boobs and things, it reminds me of Nazis. It reminds me of Nazi behavior, experimenting on human beings. You know, they also shut down the churches, the Nazis, that resisted them. But funny enough, not the Mormon church. 16,000 Mormons actively had their faith during Nazi Germany's reign. And so, I used to be a Mormon. And so I looked into one of their members there that was head of the COVID task force for the Mormon church. And he used to be a Pfizer lobbyist. And so this Mormon guy and he was the guy setting the COVID policy for the Mormon church, meaning that if you were a part of a congregation, your local bishop was not authorized to give you a religious exemption. They offered no religious exemptions, the Mormons, to their members during the COVID rise. And so I saw a lot of just horrible, reminiscent behavior from, I'd heard stories about the Nazis, like I said, from my family that fought them. And I saw what was happening in America, and I was, Operation Paperclip, they brought them over and they've infiltrated deeply into all parts of our society and government. It's a really small world. My vet for 30 years in Colorado, his grandfather was Leon Thoreau, who was a famous FBI agent who uncovered a Nazi spy ring in America. And J. Edgar Hoover fired him, and then they prosecuted him because he talked about it in 1939. That's my vet. So it's interesting just to see some of these coincidence or not. I'm not sure, but anyways, I mean, what greater honor than to give your life in the service of your country and a righteous country. And so that's where I'm at with this. Is the good Lord can use me however he wants, including take my life if it helps him. And because I'm not going to live like a slave, I'm not going to have my children live like slaves, and we're not going to live in fear. And we're going to live the free American life that we've always lived, or die trying.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I will say is, through my research, I trace a lot of this corruption back to an organization called the Knights of Malta. And that's who I personally believe, Ricky. That's who I personally believe is who is controlling the Central Intelligence Agency.
Well, there's also the Illuminati that was incorporated 1 month before the Declaration of Independence was, and that was in Germany. And 1 month before the Declaration of Independence. So, perhaps there was some sort of infiltration, this group into the Masons.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And let me mention this, because I want you to we got a few moments left, and I want you to tell listeners what's next for you and what you're doing, and leave you to give some final thoughts. But what I traced back through a guy named Eric John Phelps, who's a historian and theologian out of Pennsylvania, is a guy named Loyola, Ignatius de Loyola, who in 1540, under a papal bull, created something called the Regimini Militante Ecclesiae, That's a Papa Bull in 1540, which is otherwise known as the Jesuits. And I believe the Jesuits are connected to the Knights of Malta. But what their objective was a counter Reformation to what was happening in Europe at the time with Martin Luther. And of course, Georgetown University, a feeder into DC, is the oldest Jesuit institution. And their logo, as a matter of fact, Ricky, their logo is very similar, almost identical to this great seal of the United States. But you mentioned Illuminati, and so here I draw a parallel with this Ignatius de Loyola, who was either mentored and or he was a member of the Spanish Alumbrados. And Alumbrados mean the enlightened ones, or the Illuminati with the Spanish. So there's a connection that goes back centuries and centuries for Americans to consider in the formation and foundation of the country, and how that element, like you're saying, with the Bavarian Illuminati, with Adam Weishaupt forming that section in Bavaria in 1776, May 1st, I believe it was, just a month before the Declaration of Independence. There's some of these old European roots that Americans, I believe, should be taken into consideration.
Completely agree. But I'm hopeful. I'm really hopeful for our future. I believe there's a great awakening and movement. And by illuminating some of these issues like pornography and stuff, we can actually, stab them right in the heart, or try our hardest, push this evil back, because it's going to take us all.
Yeah, and I won't back down. And knowing that you won't back down, that fortifies any type of movement that you've got going and I've got going, and any listeners has going. So thank you for doing the work that you do, Ricky. And I wasn't aware of the Kyle Rittenhouse connection with you. And again, thanks for joining Discussions of Truth, Ricky. As we wind down the episode, we have a few more moments. Leave listeners with some final directives. What are you doing? What's the future for the Council on Pornography Reform and Real American Heroes? Maybe you want to give some examples of who you've chosen to be an American hero, and then what you'd like Americans to walk away with, and some action items. What they can do to get involved.
Yeah, so we have some on our website, realamericanheroesfoundation.org. You can actually read two of our films that are both true stories. These are powerful and important stories. We love one's about the Battle of Wanat in Afghanistan, and the other is about a Navy SEAL who swam 2,400 miles down the Mississippi River, 1 mile for every KIA in Afghanistan. So you can support our foundation. You can read our content. You can send us a note. If you have a story, you can submit stories to us. We're looking for other stories to tell and help other people develop. So we have that process. We all got to pray. I mean, we really do have to reconnect, in my opinion, with the Almighty. There's a lot here in the physical world that can cause us to have stress and fear. But I'd like everyone to understand that I believe truly that this is the temporary world. This is like the projection, in a sense. But the eternal world is souls are eternal, I believe. And so I believe that will come after the physical. So don't fear. This is temporary. Whatever you're going through is temporary, and there's an eternity after this. The Council on Pornography Reform, we're trying to collect stories of Americans that have been hurt by pornography. A woman at the airport came up to me the other day and told me that her husband had taken his own life because of pornography. He'd seen some child porn, and an investigation was opened into him. And instead of putting his family through that, he decided to take his life. And so, there's stories out there about people that have pornography has really hurt them. We'd like America to share those stories if they want to give any of their own personal testimonials. And you can learn about that on councilonpornreform.org. We are developing legislation. So I've hired an attorney in Virginia who has experience with writing legislation. And so we're going to get that legislation written to the 80% mark regarding we want an off switch, and we want it back in the .xxx URL. Once we have that legislation written, we'll bring it to look for sponsors. And then the Congress and the Senate will put it through their process. We're just trying to create a movement and energy of people, because there's lots of good people out there that see the perversion is wrong. If we can unite those Americans and we can get some good legislation passed, or maybe even Trump needs to sign an executive order about this when he gets in. I don't know. We can then take that energy, though, into the next issue. Pornography can be a uniting issue that we want to protect the little ones and all of us from. And then we could take that group of people into like balanced budget and deal with the Fed, and term limits and other positive things that can affect our lives. But we need to build a group of people and some energy first. And that's what we're trying to do with Council on Porn Reform. And then one last thing I wanted to let you know is what is it? Creature from Jekyll Island, Julie, on YouTube?
Jedward Griffin.
What? The Road to Jekyll Island on YouTube. My significant other did a documentary series, a short one, 15 episodes, and they're like, how long each? 10 minutes, about the Fed.
Nice.
And so it's really good information on the Fed and the history of that cursed ground too.
I've been to Jekyll Island and I've seen where the phone call was taking place. So I'm very interested in checking this out, Ricky. Very much interested in that.
Yeah, so that you can find that on YouTube, and it's a whole thing on the Fed.
Okay. Ricky, some final thoughts, some final words. I've got about 90 seconds left. I'm going to leave you with the last word.
Goodness. We've all been fooled. The propaganda has been intense. It's been nonstop, and it's led us astray. But it doesn't have to stay this way. We can correct it. We do have to correct it, or else the trajectory we're on is the end of our nation as we know it. So please wake up, America. Please wake up, parents. And let's fix this socially and economically for the little ones coming behind us, because we're being very selfish in our behavior and not thinking about what world we're going to give them. And they're going to be slaves. I mean, every child is born now, I think, with what is it, $50 or $75 or $100,000 of debt on their head, and they haven't incurred any of those bills, but they're being born into a sense of servitude, economic servitude. So let's fix this. Let's pull together. Let's stop arguing, and let's get some solutions to make it better for all of them.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ricky Schroder. Ricky, I look forward to inviting you back on the program.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.